Now, I begin by first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to make this a presentation of my work of research. However, I begin by acknowledging that I am presenting this paper not as a philosopher, but as a student of philosophy. This will bring out two main attitudes: the quest to know and the quest to share what I'm acquiring in the process of learning. Now, in the process, I will not avoid revisiting what my professors of philosophy have taught me in this field at the university. The ideas of particularly my professor of cosmology, J.M. Nyasani of the University of Nairobi, and those of Professor Nicholas Fogliaco will be clearly manifested. Precisely the background of this paper, unlike other scholarly works, is a lecture hall. The paper therefore stands many chances of academic challenges, ranging from epistemological, metaphysical, and logical challenges. As I write, I'm open to any of these challenges, which I believe will enrich the field of this paper as a philosophical paper, a presentation based on researches in philosophy. In one of his lectures in philosophical ethics, Professor Joseph M. Nyasani of the University of Nairobi closed with a question which at the beginning did not make much sense to me, but which later put me in an abrupt crisis. It is a question that will best be answered by himself than by any other person, whether a philosopher or a mere intellectual. In my opinion, it is a question to which the best answer will be another question and not an attempted answer at all. The professor asks, "Dear students, don't you think the war present today in the world can only be solved by another war stronger than itself and preferably fought by people completely new on this planet?" I was one of the students in the very lecture hall where the professor posed this question. At the moment, I was just finishing the first degree in philosophy, and one of the greatest preoccupations in my mind was to answer to the question of what exactly I was going to do with philosophy outside the lecture room. Having spent nearly 4 years attending the lectures of philosophy, I had been challenged to find out what would be the pragmatic part of all these tiresome philosophical discourses that the Pontifical Urbaniana University of Rome had recommended to me and fellow students of philosophy towards the fulfillment of the overall requirements for the degree of Bachelor of Philosophy. In any case, I had already a question to answer, yet just at this 2-hour lecture there arose a more confusing, a more disturbing, brain-taking self-introspection at which my intellect seemed to be at a crossroads. At the very outset, I ignored the question. When Professor asked this question, it became clear that he was not in need of any immediate response, probably because he understood how critical the question was. He did not ask any student to attempt an answer. In fact, those who expressed their readiness to respond to the question were quickly advised to preserve their comments. Eventually, it was with this question that the professor closed his lecture. In my case, this was to mark the last philosophy class, particularly the last lecture I had with Professor J. M. Nyasani. Yet, it was to open a new era, the real period of reflection and research, as as a process of concretizing what I was just about to graduate ever since I joined academics. Much time did not pass. In the subsequent time, I found two of my fellows in a hot discussion on the same question. In their opinion, the world truly needs the fourth war, this time round a war of not of weapons. A revolutionary war is needed. On this they all agreed. But what put them apart, and therefore separated them, was the fact of having war solved by another war. Put differently, the question is, how can you treat a disease by simply replacing it with another more deadly disease? They asked for my opinion. As a matter of fact, I did not respond to their question because I took it as none of my business. They, however, challenged me to reflect about it. Interestingly, it was this reflection that ignited in me the need to re-evaluate Nyasani's question, and in the process the question became live and heavy, begging for a research and a philosophically founded reflection. What was to follow this was a systematic and methodical research in the field of ethics through the paths of epistemology and metaphysics. Even without applying the rules of logic and linguistics, it seemed right from the start that there were minor questions hidden within the main question. Underlying the major question were the unasked questions, which, even though not directly put to the ears of us students, they needed special recognition and reflection. For the first time after being challenged by my fellow students, I had just seen how, without asking, the professor had asked as many questions within a single question. The question may follow. Under which field of philosophy did the professor intend his question answered? In which context did he formulate these questions? Did he want it answered through metaphysics? Was his intention to be given an answer from a pure epistemological standpoint? Or a purely logical answer? Was his intention to hear an answer resulting from heavily argued cosmological reflections? Or a systematic set of ethical theses, antitheses, and eventually syntheses? Such are the questions, gentlemen, that ran across my rational faculty and yet I must add that they have nothing to do with the original inquiry of the professor. Methodologically, there is no way I could embark on replying to the professor's original inquiry without first establishing which field of philosophy the inquiry follows. Of course, it is also indisputable that any faculty, any branch of philosophy can readily answer to his inquiry. But this ipso facto results into the danger of answering to our own question and not the professor's question. The easiest way then would have been to turn to the professor and ask him what exactly he wanted. And I shared this difficulty with my companion in the class of Renaissance philosophy, and they almost solved my crisis, only to put me in a more deeper crisis. They invited me to find my own method, my own approach, yes, my own field of philosophy in which I wanted to formulate a reply to the professor. In any case, I had to find my own context, my own philosophy of the professor's question. I had to be original. This automatically ruled out the possibility of getting back to the professor and to ask him what he wanted done with his question. At the same time, it reminded me of his previous warning that he needed not be answered, probably because he wanted people to think and find out their own ways, their own position about his thought. He wanted not his thought, but our thoughts. Not his way, but our own ways. This is a typical scholarly attitude. As a philosopher, he was free to be challenged and to be drawn back to the drawing board. But as a scholar, he must have wanted not simply to be challenged, but to be challenged with the right reasons, preferably based on empirical and existential standpoints. Now, while the former is open to a thinker, the latter is typically the work of a researcher. A thinker is not the same as a researcher. My work in this paper is not the work of a thinker, it is the work of a researcher. In principle, it is this latter that is behind the formulation of this paper. In other words, this paper is an academic reply to an academic inquiry. As an academic work, it is not absolute. It is perhaps only a starting point of a debate which may spark more philosophical arguments. It is a debate in which scholars are invited to give their evaluations and critiques as a way of not only widening the subject matter, but also making known their unique contributions in the field of philosophy. This way, the paper is rich. The richness of this paper is not from within itself, much less than it is the scholarly response from without. The paper itself is a reply to an existential question. Nonetheless, it is not an end in itself as much as it is a means to an end. It is a means to an external inquiry. It is a means to the external intellectual interplay in the same matter. Here I arrive at the assertion that the work done in this paper serves not the conclusive but the mediative function of bringing into harmony all useful arguments, reflections, researches, and conclusions about the challenge posed by the renowned professor of cosmology and metaphysics. But what is this challenge? In the outline above, I have briefly reported what the challenge is by highlighting what it is not. In the same way, I have made known the function of this paper by making known what is not the function of this paper. And yet, I aim at replying to the reality as it really was from the cosmologist's mouth. Strictly speaking, I seem to have explained what the question was not, and not what the question really was. Ontologically, I seem to have been stating what was the professor's not asking when he was asking what he was asking. Philosophically speaking, I have violated the metaphysical principle of non-contradiction. Something either is or is not. It cannot be and not be at the same time. I am aware of this. But methodologically speaking, this is the scholastic, Thomistic via negativa, in which one seeks to explain what a reality is by explaining what it's not. In rational terms, this has the implication that by asking his question, the cosmologist cum metaphysician was also asking some questions hidden in the main question. They came silently without verbs, but they are questions to which the 21st century philosophers must reply. It's up to this century's wise men to discover them and to embark on a serious research and find out their existential implications, especially in the time frame of our epoch. These questions were asked not in the 18th or 19th or 20th centuries, but in the 21st century. And whatever the replies are, they should answer to the here and now, yes, to the 21st century needs. Nyasani was born and educated in the 21st century, but he did his scholarly experience in reference to the previous centuries, and yet he places his question in the context of this century. So the question begs the problems of our time. So now, in this paper, I argue that the world can have a fourth world war, a war that will not involve the use of firearms, a war free from any atomic weapons, a new war that involves a transcendental revolutionary fight, not against another man or woman, not against another nation or state, not a continental or world war, but a war against attitudes, a revolutionary war.